would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which I live and work, the Gundungurra land and people. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. I also want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which you, our listeners, are joining us from today. I recognise the deep connection that First Nations people have to this land, their enduring culture, and their commitment to the preservation and care for their country. This land was never ceded, and it always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Hey there, and welcome to Beyond the Surface, the podcast where we explore the stories of people who have survived religious trauma, left high control or cult communities, and are deconstructing their faith. I'm your host, Sam, and each week I'll talk with individuals who have taken the brave step to start shifting their beliefs that might have once controlled and defined their lives. Join us as we dig into their experiences, the challenges they've faced, and the insights they've gained. Whether you're on a similar journey or you're just curious about these powerful stories, you're in the right place. This is Beyond the Surface. Welcome, Megan. Thanks for joining me.
Well, thanks for having me.
I'm so excited about this episode because I love your Instagram. It is so good.
Thank you.
And I've just noticed as of today when we're recording it, you've just rechanged your name. You've rebranded.
Yes. So I found myself, so it's Religious Harm Recovery now, and it used to be Reclaiming Self Therapy. And when I started last summer posting on Instagram, I had no idea what to call myself. You just try out different names, and doing religious trauma something, just there were so many accounts like that. So as I started telling people about my work and working with clients, religious harm recovery kept coming up over and over again. So I just finally switched the Instagram to that handle, and I'm owning it. I'm loving it so far.
Yeah, I love it. I think also, in my experience, it takes a really long time for people to be able to use the word trauma also. So I find using the term religious harm, I find a lot of people would just gravitate that to that language a lot more because trauma comes with a bit of weight to it. And a lot of people I find don't love using that terminology and are even resistant to using it to start with. So.
I was resistant.
Yeah,
I
same.
because I didn't think that I met the criteria. I'm a
Yeah.
therapist. I know what the actual
Yeah.
DSM criteria is. And I just didn't think that that applied to me. I know it does now. You
Yeah.
have the complex and developmental trauma, but if I had been researching for help with what I was dealing with a
Mm,
number of years ago, I wouldn't have been Googling religious trauma. That
no.
wouldn't have been part of it.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember arguing for months and months with my own therapist, even as a therapist going, it's not trauma. Like it's not trauma. I know what trauma is. I work with trauma. And then I think it was like 12 or 13 months later, I'm like, okay, maybe it's a little bit of trauma. Oh,
Yes.
I love it's such a journey. Even for us as therapists, it's a journey. So, yeah.
Yeah.
So thank you for joining me. Now, obviously, we both work in this space, but we also both have stories in this space. So where does your story start?
So my story begins with indoctrination.
Mhm. Fun.
And when I say indoctrination, I am talking about that persistent, almost mind control approach that high control religions use to bring people into their way of thinking and being and existing. So you
Mm,
have all aspects of your life controlled, your emotions, your thinking, your behavior. So my parents gravitated towards a very tiny fundamentalist evangelical church when I was probably 3, maybe 4 very young.
Yeah.
Neither one of them were super religious growing up. But my grandparents found this little tiny church as a way, I think, of kind of addressing some major family traumas that were going on for them. And so when my parents moved back into the area where my grandparents were living, they began going to that church. So that is where
Mm,
my story begins, with this tiny little church in
mm,
the middle of nowhere, very fundamentalist and very, black and white thinking. This is how you do it. Everyone else is wrong.
mm. So what was it like for little Megan growing up in that environment?
Well, I think like most children, you don't realize how toxic it is until you look back through an adult lens.
Yeah.
So I grew up going in the US. We have something called Awana, which
Hmm.
is, do you have that in Australia?
No, but I
You've
know of
heard of
it.
it.
It's got a lot to be
Okay.
responsible for from from my point of view. Yes.
Yes, yes. So I started in Awana when I was just a Sparky, so that would be kindergarten age. And it's an acronym that stands for Approved Workmanship Are Not Ashamed, I believe. And it's all about doing the workbooks and memorizing Bible verses and learning, you know, their beliefs from a very young age. It's just drilled into you. And that was my social outlet for my elementary school years because I was also homeschooled. So I didn't really have social connections that a lot of kids got from going to school. I just had my siblings, and we were homeschooled with a faith-based curriculum that taught creationism, not evolution. We had Bible classes as part of our curriculum, all of that. So it was a very isolated experience. And then my social outlets were things like Awana and Sunday school and things like that.
So still very faith-based social outlets.
Everything. I mean, my
Yeah.
parents, especially my mom, was very committed to separating us from the world, which
Mm,
she, believed herself was dangerous, and then instilled that fear in us as well.
yeah.
Very
Um,
isolated.
yeah. And I think a lot of people don't necessarily automatically use the term high control when it comes to churches, right? So, in
Mhm.
what other ways was, I mean, obviously, your education system and your socials were controlled in that space, but
Mhm.
what other ways did that look like a high control space?
Mhm. So, and when I look back, I'm still to this day trying to understand how much was my family and how much was the religion pushing
Mm,
it. It was so interwoven in my experience. But within my home, we did not have access to media outside
mm,
of Christian sources. So my parents turned off the TV when I was probably about 8 years old. It was very traumatic because we had these
yeah.
shows that we watched every Friday, and I use the word trauma very loosely in this context, of course. It was not actually trauma. I can actually
Yeah.
say that about this one. But we came home, the TV was shut off because they didn't want us to be exposed to these worldly influences, like
Yeah.
watching other children on TV do things that they didn't approve of, even though it was very GPG kinds of stuff.
Mm,
Still, that was too much of the world to be
yeah.
watching that. So then we only watched, at that point, it was VHS.
Mm,
So movies that were carefully curated by my parents, who watched a lot of really old films, like from the 60s or 50s, like black and white stuff. So that was really controlled. We didn't read books that didn't have Christian authors. All of the radio, it was Christian programming. So we didn't listen to the secular radio unless it was the oldie station. There's
yeah.
a theme here with older was better, even though
Yeah.
we know that older is also not better.
No.
But so So that was part of it as well, that these old songs were okay, old movies were okay, but nothing that was present day was really okay. So that was controlled. What I wore was very regulated. Of course, I grew up in purity culture, so modesty was always top of mind. Skirts had to be down to my knee at least. You had to have shorts a certain length, no spaghetti straps. It was, yeah, the apparel was very rigidly controlled as well. How we spoke was controlled, no cursing, no taking the Lord's name in vain. Our thoughts were controlled, like don't think of certain types of like jealousy or lustful thoughts or I'm kind of drawing a blank on all the rules, but you probably are
Yeah.
familiar with this line of thinking, like all the things you're not supposed to
Mm.
dwell on or think about.
Yeah.
Only
And all
happy
of the
thoughts
rules,
here, right?
yeah, and all of the rules are don't do this as opposed to do this. It's all of the stuff you're
Hmm.
not allowed to do as opposed to, the freedom to do these things because, freedom um, freedom is scary. Freedom allows for questions. Freedom allows for
Yes.
curiosity, and
Yep.
yeah, that's dangerous territory.
Well, and the other, I think the final thing that was really controlled was my social world. So I talked about being homeschooled, but even beyond that, making friends with people outside of our faith group was very dangerous because they
Yeah.
could lead us astray. So who we associated with beyond witnessing or converting them
Mm,
was very rigidly controlled as well.
yeah. And that is hard to break also to, when you are, taught to see everybody as risky and dangerous.
Mhm.
But in the same token, you can talk to them if you are trying to convert them, just leads to that, savior of the world sort of mentality, which is
Mhm.
a lot of pressure for little people to have on their shoulders.
Oh, I felt that pressure intensely. The churches I went to, so evangelism was, of
Mm.
course, the priority being in evangelical Christianity. But the
Yeah.
missionaries of our churches were viewed as celebrities. So they would come home on furlough from the mission field and share their stories, and they would do special offerings for them. And like meeting them was such a big deal
Yeah.
because we'd be hearing about them and the work they were doing for months.
Mm,
And the idea was that there was no higher calling
mm,
than to leave your family and your home, like your country of origin, to go off somewhere else and begin winning souls for the Lord. And
yeah.
that was extremely anxiety provoking for me because I did not like to witness. I did not like to evangelize. And I was pretty bad at it. So
Yeah.
I wanted to figure out, okay, how can I do this thing that we're supposed to be doing without going to another country and talking to strangers about God? Because that seems horrifying.
Yeah,
So that's why
absolutely.
I became a social worker. So here we are.
Yeah, I talk about there's a part of my story where I was in Fiji, which is a Christian nation for starters, a colored nation. Um, but we as, young white people wanted to go and tell them about Jesus and there is just so many like gross layers is the only term that I can
Yeah.
think of to witnessing I mean and there's a lot of like racial layering as well in terms of going into particularly colored nations as white people thinking that we know better somehow that yeah, but missionary work is put on a pedestal for sure. um
Yeah.
because I mean it's the equivalent essentially of like when Jesus t asked his disciples to leave everything and follow him, right?
Yeah.
It's like the ultimate
Exactly.
example that you are doing the Lord's work. So, um, you talked about the control of thoughts, and we were talking a little bit before recording that swearing and things like that is still something that is is not something that's easy to do or is able to do at all.
Mhm.
And so I think, people forget the long-lasting impact of this sort of thing, right? I, will say, oh my God, but there's still like a little part of me that goes, oh no, like, oh, particularly if I say it without realizing. And
Yeah.
then I catch myself afterwards. Are there moments where that happens for you?
Oh, it just happened today. Yes, it happens all the time. Yes,
Uh,
and I want to be able to say, "Oh my God," but that was the worst,
mm,
most heinous thing that
yeah.
you could do as a believer, to take the Lord's name in vain.
Mm,
And so I still have these really weird things I say, like, I'll be like, "Oh goodness," or "Oh my gosh," or I
yeah.
mean, that's not really that weird, but I'm drawing a blank on some of the weird things I do say instead. But I think a lot of Christians have a workaround terminology to say
Uh-huh.
instead of the no words or
Yeah.
phrases, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm trying to think as well, but I think I'm drawing a blank because I haven't used them for a really long time.
Like, oh,
Oh,
sugar, oh,
yes.
fudge bucket, oh, like those kinds of things.
Yeah, I had a friend who would say like fire truck instead of saying fuck, essentially. And
Yeah.
like I'm like I like short like in my young teenage brain goes like if you thought the swear word but said fire truck instead, like, isn't God still going to know? Like, just like whether you say it out loud or not, like, if God is all knowing, then like he's gonna know anyway. Like,
But then it comes down to being an example. And
yes.
that was a big part of the control too, is that you
Yeah.
had to maintain this perfect facade of Christianity so that your life was a witness.
Yeah.
So even if God knew what was going on behind you know,
Hmm.
the weird phrase you chose to say, what if somebody heard
Yeah.
you and now you're not being an example of
Mm.
Christian behavior? So
Yeah, absolutely. And particularly if you were female, you were then not being very ladylike,
mhm.
which I hate that term more than anything else.
Yeah.
But um, purity culture comes up in nearly all of these episodes in some way. It has a lot to it has a lot of there's a lot to be responsible for.
Yeah.
What was purity culture like for you personally?
So this is also one of those things that's hard for me to unwind from my family of origin stuff,
Mm.
because I think a big part of the reason my mom in particular really clung to this religion, so I should back up. My parents did separate and divorce when I was around 10 or 11.
Oh,
My dad, even though he did take us to Awana and church and he was very involved, I don't think I would, looking back, have called him a true believer. So
right.
I think he did go along to get along for quite a few years, but after they separated, he just kind of went back to his pre-fundamentalist life, pre-marriage life and
Mm,
beliefs. He and I never really talked about that. Unfortunately, there was a lot of parental alienation that occurred with the divorce. And for people who don't know what that is, that's when one parent systematically turns the children against the other parent.
yeah.
And I didn't realize, of course, as a child that that was happening, but a lot of what was used against him was his non-Christian beliefs. He
Mm,
was labeled abusive, he was labeled a non-believer.
mm,
And so because of the way we grew up, that was very fearful for me as a child. I had three brothers as well, and different ages, they were affected differently. But so we were turned against him. And because I was a true believer myself, I mean, I'd been indoctrinated since I could speak, essentially.
yeah.
Um, it was very hard for me to feel safe around him, because of the way the narrative was spun by my mom and my maternal grandparents. So she had a lot of her own trauma. I don't know the extent of it, but she was always been extremely fearful of men. And that isn't necessarily connected to religion for her because she wasn't brought up in purity culture and indoctrinated the same way I was. But I believe she saw the church's approach to sexuality as a very safe alternative to what she experienced culturally. So she fully bought into all of the purity culture standards, modesty, not dating until I was older. She really liked the idea of the courtship model. I, of course, read I Kissed Dating Goodbye by Josh Harris. And there were a couple other ones that I read as well. The Ludies, Eric and Leslie Ludy, I think, had written a book that talked a lot about purity culture standards. So I was very bought into that as well, abstinence only. I wasn't to the extent where I'm not going to touch my partner before marriage, but I certainly wasn't going to have sex with my partner. So I could do certain things. I really pushed the boundaries, by the way, but felt tremendous shame and guilt, of course, because now I'm maybe not a fully chewed up piece of gum, but I'm
Not quite as pure.
My wrapper's a little messed up.
Yeah.
So,
Oh,
yeah.
goodness. Yeah. And you mentioned like that you were a true believer at this point. And so what was your personal relationship with God like through all of this?
I would say I had a very close relationship with God. I was a prayer journaler.
Oh, weren't we all?
Weren't we all? Yes. And I'm grateful to this day because for some, I know it can be actually too triggering to do any kind of journaling after being a prayer journaler. But for me, the practice still holds, not to journal or prayer journal or journal and writing to God, but just kind of writing to myself or writing just in general. So thankfully, I didn't lose that. But it was a very close connected relationship. I was constantly seeking, how can I serve? How do I turn my life over to God? I didn't have any ambitions of anything I wanted for myself personally. I mean, I wanted to get married because I was very love starved. That's a phrase that I use a lot with my clients now that I find applies to myself, because even though there was so much control, there wasn't a lot of connection and there wasn't attunement and there wasn't emotional awareness in my family. So I did seek that out through a romantic partner. So I wanted to be with a partner, but I didn't really see myself having children. I didn't see myself pursuing goals of any kind or traveling or doing the things a lot of people think about doing when they're in their teens and early 20s, like when they're thinking about how they want their lives to go. I didn't have any of that. All I wanted was to serve God. And because I wasn't going to be a missionary, because that sounded horrifying, as I said before, I became a social worker, and that is how I was going to bring the light of Christ's love to the people who needed help the most. That's all I knew going into college that I wanted to do. So, yes, it was a very, I would say I had an enmeshed relationship with God.
What a therapy term to throw in. Oh, I mean, and I want to get to the irony of being a social worker, but was your relationship with God based around love or based around fear?
It was actually, I haven't thought about it in that way before. I think I would say it was based around fear because there was
Mm.
anxiety about letting God down.
Yeah.
Um, I didn't, so one of the common themes, so it was a very shameful experience to be a single mother in these churches, and because divorce was a sin. And of course, I believe that's why she had to label him as abusive and all of these things, because that was the loophole out.
Mhm.
Um, and I believe she really feels that he was. I don't know that he was or wasn't. I'm not ready to say he was, but I think that that
Mhm.
is what he had to be depicted as in order to get that loophole out of the marriage in that setting. Um, but I sort of lost my train of thought just there. So based in
Fear,
love or
fear
based
or
in
love?
fear,
Yeah.
fear or love and
Yeah.
anxiety. Yeah. So I think oh, I know what I was going to say. So, growing up with a single mom in those settings, people think, "Oh, God can be your daddy. God can be your new father." Have you ever heard of people say, like,
Yeah.
starting their prayers with Daddy Jesus or Daddy
Yeah.
God? And like, that always gave me ick,
Yeah,
even
it still
as a
does.
teenager.
It still does.
I mean, it really should now, but even as a
Oh,
teenager, when I believed,
yeah.
like, this is really like, ooh. So
Yeah.
I never saw God as a paternal father, loving figure. I think that just
Mm.
wasn't really modeled for me, so I had no idea what that would look like anyway. And I didn't see him as a romantic partner. Have you heard of going on dates with
Oh,
Jesus?
yeah, Jesus is my boyfriend.
Jesus,
Oh,
my boyfriend. Yeah, so Jesus, my
yeah.
boyfriend, daddy, Jesus, all of these creepy things. So
Yeah.
that was not part of it. For me, I think because my family structure was pretty authoritarian, my maternal grandfather was very authoritarian. I think it was seeing God as this ultimate authority that I didn't want to let down. I
Mm.
didn't want to displease. So it was more fear-based. Also, so since I've been doing this work, I didn't realize this was actually a thing, but I hear a lot about heaven anxiety where people say, like, I didn't really want to go to heaven. That sounded terrible to me.
Yeah.
Kind of creeped me out or sounded scary as a kid. And I would have to agree, like, I was not drawn to the evangelical picture of heaven at all. However, I was very fearful of the evangelical depiction of hell and
Yeah.
burning forever and being tortured and weeping and gnashing of teeth. And it was very graphic
Mm.
and didn't want to go there.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it wasn't about heaven. It wasn't about love. It wasn't about any of that. It was about avoiding disappointing God and avoiding the fiery pits of hell.
Mm, yeah. And I mean, we see that even in secular spaces in terms of like negative reinforcement is much like propels people much more because we just want to avoid the thing that we don't want as
Mhm.
opposed to getting the thing that we do want. So yeah, have an anxiety. I especially when heaven was that this is what heaven is in terms of like what we were trying to create heaven on earth. And it's like, well, this is awful. Like, this is boring. Like, I don't want this. But yeah, you're right. It's the fear of avoiding the
Mhm.
very graphic. It's ironic that we let kids hear this graphic imagery of hell. But yet, like, Harry Potter is dangerous. And,
Exactly.
all of these, and we don't let children watch horror movies. But, the violent and graphic depictions of hell is
Mhm.
is somehow okay.
Or The Passion of the
Oh my
Christ, or
gosh.
the Left Behind
Mm.
movie and books. Like, the
Oh,
Left Behind books really traumatized me. I read those when I was about 13, and then I
yeah.
did have pretty significant rapture anxiety after that. That
Yeah.
was
Oh,
that
they're
was
awful.
tough.
Yeah, the Passion of the Christ movie, like I still I reckon if I thought about it too long, it's like seared in my memory.
Mhm.
It's it just is like really really guilt reinforcing that
Mhm.
you're the reason this is happening. So
Yeah.
yeah, okay. The irony of you being a social worker, because mental health, I would imagine, was not necessarily something that would have been talked about, and not talked about in a healthy capacity anyway.
Yeah.
So how did
Well,
you land there?
mental health just didn't even really exist
Yeah.
growing up. Which was interesting in a way because my mom and dad did go to a Christian counselor
Mm,
as their marriage was kind of on its last legs. And so I had that kind of model that they did that, but we were never put into counseling of any kind. And I thought of mental health issues as those really like schizophrenia or those really intense depictions of mental health. Um, but not something that, I didn't know what trauma was, of course,
mm,
growing up or anything like that. So when I became a social worker, it was not with the intent of becoming a therapist.
right.
Um, and in fact, I didn't even have the phrase or the terminology social worker until I was in my freshman year of college and was told
Mm,
by a professor that that's what I wanted to do. So it was a very weird sequence
wow.
of events. I knew that I wanted to have a profession where essentially I would work, and this is just me from rural America, like thinking the cities are the dens of iniquity. So, of course, I saw myself working in a city
Mm,
with people who actually teen moms is what really stood out to me is wanting to work with teen moms. And that's probably because I was conditioned to believe like getting pregnant as a teenager was the worst thing that could happen to you.
yeah.
And there was a song, had you heard of the Christian group Out of Eden? They were sort of like the Christian version of Destiny's Child.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
So there was a song about a girl named Sarah Jane who got pregnant and she was out on the streets all alone.
Mm,
And that just spoke to my heart as a 14-year-old. I was like, I want to help girls like little Sarah Jane.
mm,
So that really steered my thinking about what I wanted to do, but I didn't know the term social work at that point.
okay.
Um, when I got to college, I went to a Christian college, and I'm very grateful for this experience actually, because I ended up going to a more progressive Christian college. My youth pastors were very alarmed. They wanted me to go to like a biblical Bible college, like very conservative. And I didn't know much about doctrine. Like I just thought that all Christian is the same, but they knew that all Christian wasn't the same. And so they
Yeah.
were alarmed that I was going to be exposed to more progressive Christian beliefs. But
Mm,
I went anyway. I had picked it and that's where I went. And you have those foundational introduction classes that are kind of like how to be a college student that
mhm,
everybody takes. And I ended up in a class with people who had all checked off they wanted to do social work. Like this was a big degree path at that school, that and education, youth ministry, those were the big ones.
mm.
But I had checked off undecided. So I just got placed in this group with all these people who knew what social work was and wanted to do it. And
Yeah.
I sat down with an advisor later that semester and he was asking me what I wanted to do and I was telling him and he was like, that's social work, that's social work, that's social work. So I declared social work as my major. I absolutely loved it. It was so
Mm,
aligned with my values, but then it became in conflict with my indoctrination
mm.
because social work is a pretty liberal profession and they believe in human rights, for example,
Yeah.
and equality, for example,
Yeah.
whereas the churches I grew up in were very homophobic. I mean, looking back, of course, they were also racist,
Mm,
sexist, anti mental health, anti equality. Like it was just But I didn't know any of that. I mean, I was so isolated and just, I had no real understanding of the issues in the world that when I got into this degree path, all of these things opened up to me, but that is what started to create so much cognitive dissonance
Mm,
about how I had been indoctrinated. And then I was in my 20s just trying to navigate, you know, being a Christian and holding on to faith while also being a social worker and holding on to humanity. And those two were
yeah.
really in conflict with each other.
Yeah, what was it? I'm picturing like the image that's coming to mind is you sort of standing and the foundation under you is just slowly cracking and the cracks are just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And so what was that like? Because that sounds terrifying.
Yeah. Well, I think I was really good at dissociating.
Yeah.
So that was one of my
As
coping
the answer to
skills.
the prayer journal, aren't we all?
Right, right.
Yeah.
So I was really good at shutting things down because that's a skill you learn is you just don't follow that path of inquiry too far. But one of the things, so okay, so I graduated and I worked for a year, and I then decided to go back to grad school to be a therapist at that point. And I chose play therapy because in my year of work, right outside of my undergrad, I worked in a nursing home. So I was working with older adults. And that was very difficult for me because it wasn't, people were at the end of their lives, and I saw myself helping to influence people earlier in their lives so that they could have a better life.
Mm.
And that goes back again to that Christian, I probably indoctrination of, you got to catch them young and steer them in
Mm.
the right way.
I
Um,
haven't heard the phrase catch them young for so long.
yeah.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So as I think I graduated when I was 21. So did a full year of working as a 21-year-old. So at 22, I enrolled in grad school. So by 24, I was a therapist,
Wow.
which is so
And
crazy to me to
um
think about.
yeah, I mean, but I almost think that the crazier thing is that at 24, not that you were a therapist, but that at 24 you weren't married.
Okay, so yes, let's
Or
talk
were
about
you?
this. I was not. I
Right.
was not.
Because like by 24, like you should be like married with at least one kid or at least one on the way. I mean, like married, barefoot, and pregnant is kind of the thing.
I know. So this is another, when I look back on how my path differed from a lot of people I talk to, particularly women,
Mm,
not only from the religious background, but the cultural background of central Pennsylvania is very rural, very conservative. And so even if you're not part of religion, people didn't really go to college. People
mm,
got married out of high school and started families right away. So I always knew I didn't want that. And I
mm,
always felt like I didn't belong in that town or that community. I didn't know why exactly, but I knew that I didn't fit that mold, not just because of religion. In fact, that wasn't even part of it, but I felt culturally I didn't belong.
mm,
And so I think, again, this is related to my parents divorcing when I was young, because I was raised by a single mom, and there was a lot of trauma related to that and a lot of things that were done very poorly. So I'm not romanticizing that piece, but I think I saw it was not modeled for me to have a two-parent household. It was
yeah.
modeled for me that I could just go off and be on my own. I didn't want to be because, again, I was love starved,
Mm,
but I also didn't prioritize having children. Like that was never a priority. And I was also parentified. So I was parenting my young brothers
yeah.
growing up. And I think having children probably just seemed really overwhelming and bad to me because of how we were raised and how it seemed that it was one of the hardest things that my mom had to go through, even though she chose to have 4 children.
Mm,
But here we
yeah.
are. So I was not married at 24, but I had numerous very serious relationships.
Mm.
And I always picked partners who it wasn't a selection based on marriage material per se.
Mm.
It was more based on availability. Like they are available to be in a relationship with me. We're not aligned politically. They're kind of a misogynist, they're this, they're whatever. But I had no concept, I had no self-worth
Mm.
and no understanding of what I really wanted in a partner. I just knew I needed to be connected in that way.
Yeah.
So now that you say 24, I was in a relationship from 22 to 24,
Mm.
or about 22 to 23 and a half. So it was about a year and a half long. And this guy was also homeschooled, but he was very much a part of the culture of that area. And his parents were openly racist, openly homophobic. Like we put a nice gloss on it in my family, at least.
Make it look
But
pretty.
like, yeah, like, oh, but
It's
we love them. We just
palatable.
hate the sinner, love the
Mm.
sin, hate, or love the sinner, hate the sin. But they
Yeah.
were like, would say very grotesque things.
Mm.
And it was also around in the US, we had the 2008 election where Obama was elected, and that brought up a lot of hateful, nasty
Yeah.
dialogue in this Christian community too about Obama. So, um, that relationship was emotionally and psychologically coercive and controlling. Like it
Mm.
was very deeply unhealthy. And I was, thankfully got out of it. He actually broke up with me, which, because I wasn't God's best for him. That's the
Mm.
terminology that was actually used. And I'm so grateful that I was not God's best for him, because that would have
Yeah.
been a nightmare.
Yeah.
But then I met through him who did become my husband. So I started dating a friend from that group at 24, and we were long distance for 3 years. He was in the military. He moved out to Washington State, which was across the country, and we didn't have sex. We didn't live together. We didn't do any of that. We had this long distance relationship for 3 years. And then I got married at 27, and I was proud of myself. So I'm gonna wait until I'm older to get married. And the
Oh.
ripe old age of 27, I did actually get married.
Well, long distance would be really good for purity culture, I
It
expect.
was, it
Like,
was.
oh my goodness. Okay. So, I mean, we sort of diverted from the shaking foundation, but
Oh,
I want to
yes.
go back to that because what was that like for you to be, interacting with people who, were not homeschooled, who didn't have the same, religious beliefs or background that you did, and starting to go, how can I hold this with this that seem
Yeah.
opposing?
So one thing I do feel proud of when I look back on that time of becoming a therapist is that I did not incorporate my beliefs into my work with my clients
Mm.
even as a 20-something-year-old.
Mm.
And I think I always knew that client self-determination and like being non-coercive and non-manipulative was what was ethically sound practice,
Mm. Yeah.
So I thankfully did not go down that path. And I was able to kind of hold space for these two different worlds. But it was in my early 20s with that toxic relationship
Mm.
that the foundation was really crumbling, because I was confronted with the grotesqueness of the bigotry and the hatefulness in that church I was going to, because I was going to his church at that point.
Ah.
And there were a couple of really traumatic things that happened in that church, with a church leader. And, he was imprisoned for sexually assaulting I mean, she was living with them from 9 to 13, and he was in it like 60 years old, and he was in leadership and repeatedly, and the church was divided over it. The church was blaming her for seducing him as a 9-year-old. And so those things I could not deal.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what began happening was not a cognitive awareness as much as I began to feel in my body that I physically could not get out of bed to go to church.
Mm.
And I was a Sunday school teacher of little 4-year-olds for a period of that time.
Mhm.
And, they ask you if you're willing to serve in that way. And I was like, oh yeah, I can teach a pack of 4-year-olds. I'm doing play therapy. No, it's so
Mm.
easy. And then I'm preparing these lessons. I'm like, I don't want to teach them this.
Yeah.
So we really, I mean, even when I was a Sunday school teacher, I didn't really even teach like anything that was ugly or coercive or
Yeah. I was the
fearful.
same.
We
Mm.
just played a lot. And then
Yeah.
and then I escaped out the back door. I parked by the back door around the back of the church.
Oh,
So I didn't
wow.
even go to the service afterwards. I would just go fulfill my obligation. I would like sneak out to my car and drive away. And so that went on for like 6 months to a year.
Wow.
And so I was pulling away. I was going less and less frequently. I was feeling a lot of guilt about it. All of my friends, all of my social supports were still in that religious community. So I wasn't thinking about it cognitively or bringing anything into conscious awareness that I was not in agreement with Christianity as a whole.
Mm.
I just couldn't go to that church.
Yeah.
Um, so when I did get married at 27 and moved to Washington, my husband at the time had not found a church, and he was in the military. Military guys are typically not super known for being very churchy. So it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't like he just was kind of doing his own thing, living in the barracks, living kind of like a single guy life out there. And then I came out and we got an apartment, and we just never found a church. And over the next couple of years, it was actually him that began to read books by atheists like Sam Harris and Christopher
Mm.
Hitchens, and just talking about um, kind of confronting his indoctrination, because he was very heavily indoctrinated as well, also had a background in being homeschooled, and it
Mm.
was so he was able to confront that. And then as he actually brought it into conscious awareness for me, the rest of everything
Yeah.
just fell away for me. And I was like, oh yeah, I don't believe this anymore. And actually this so many of these teachings have been harmful and
Mm.
toxic. And so that's when I would say I finally kind of owned the label of non-religious. That's how I referred to
Yeah.
myself. I still couldn't call myself an atheist because that was
Yeah.
just too big of a word
Mm.
to use.
Yeah.
But I would say non-religious and feel comfortable saying that.
Mm. So the indoctrination is crumbling, but what is happening at this point for your personal relationship with God? Because those two things are not always the same for a lot of people.
Right. So there was a lot of push and pull there. So I would
Mm.
drift away from God or my journaling and praying and whatever.
Yeah.
And then I would come back in a couple weeks or a couple of months. And then I would have like a pretty emotional experience around it. So it was a lot of push and pull. Um, yeah, I mean, up through that whole period of time where I was recognizing the toxicity in the church I was going to,
Mm.
I certainly was not disowning Jesus or
Mm.
disowning God as a figure. I think I really admired Jesus even in my 20s because I still wanted to help people.
Mm.
I still want to help you. Even now, it just looks a lot different. But his message of love really resonated with me even through my 20s. So I wasn't
Mm.
ready to let that go, but I had a lot of guilt and shame when I drifted and then would come back. Or I started doing things, like drinking alcohol or going to bars or things like that, where, that was backsliding behavior.
Yeah,
So
I
I
mean,
would go.
For people who, I mean, people are not seeing this, but Megan is sitting here with her shoulders out. Like, even that. So, like,
Yeah.
it's funny the things that we tend to do. It's like tipping, like tiptoeing into the water before you sort of just jump in.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, dressing to be provocative or
Mm.
to be sexy to go to the bars when I was in my
Yeah.
early 20s was like, that was my rebellion in a way, but
Mm.
I didn't see myself as rebelling. I just saw I don't know. It was a very
Mm.
slow process for me. And I kept a lot of it hidden from my mom or from really conservative Christian friends. But then you had those certain Christian friends who were also doing it. So then you could do it with them,
The
right? And
sneaky
then it felt
ones.
okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, was there a moment that you remember going, I don't believe in God anymore?
No,
Okay.
no, I don't think there ever was that moment. There was definitely a moment where I realized the Bible is very fallible. So I
Mm.
grew up believing it was
Mm-hmm.
infallible and that it was inaccurate in a lot of ways, missing a lot of things, and that it was used as a tool to control and coerce. Okay, so when I got to Washington, I didn't go straight to atheism at all. So I pendulum swung over to what I would call New Age spirituality,
Ah.
where I really embrace the idea of law of attraction, everything's connected, there is a universe that brings like this energetic force.
Mm-hmm.
And that helped me actually get away from this authoritarian God figure because that felt very loving and inclusive. Like
Mm-hmm.
everybody has access and there's not a place of eternal torment. There was a moment where I didn't believe in hell anymore.
Mm.
That's for sure as well. Um, so I pendulum swung over to that, bought into that hard. And then who's now my ex-husband, but he was very into the atheism thing. So it was almost like this triangle. So I swung over here to New Age spirituality. He swung over here to atheism. And then I kind of like found something in the center of all of that.
Mm.
So, even to this day, and there are still things that feel unexplainable to me, but I also don't think that my thoughts are totally creating my reality and that there's inequities and injustices that people are up against that they cannot think away or, attract
Yeah.
themselves out of that situation.
Mm.
Um, so, but it's still weird for me to say God does not exist.
Mm.
So I don't believe in the authoritarian father God figure. I don't really believe in that universal energy. I don't really know what I believe. Who knows where I am? Let's be
I
honest.
don't either. I don't think anybody who is like, I find so many people who are, whether you use the term deconstruction, detangling, whatever in that sphere, I find that the most comfort eventuates to being able to say, I don't know, and for that
Yeah.
I don't know to not induce crippling fear and anxiety.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. So I think a freedom for me is just not having the answers.
Mm.
And I don't have to have an answer ready for every man that asketh of the hope that is in you, if you
Mm.
remember that Bible verse.
Mm-hmm.
So that created a lot of anxiety where I need to know what I believe about everything, not just religion or the afterlife or whatever, but that mentality of you need to know what you believe was instilled very early on. And so you're right, like just being in a space where it's like, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
You believe in the law of attraction or you believe there's absolutely no God and that's
Mm-hmm.
fine. Like if that is working for you and it's not hurting anyone else, that is totally fine. And I don't have to know what you believe necessarily. I don't have to know what I believe.
Mm. Yeah.
So
Uh, the freedom to create connections with people that aren't belief based is like baffling as well. Like
Yeah.
that I can have a friendship with someone and it not be about religion
Yeah.
was, I find for so many people where particularly their social network was just all consuming, to have a connection with someone, oh, I play tennis with them. Like, what else do you do? That's it. Like, that's all I do with them. To be able to have connections that are just about mutual common interests,
Yeah.
is such an adjustment period, I find.
Yeah.
And to not care what they believe.
Yeah. Like it doesn't even need to come up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Whereas when you're in this indoctrinated space, that's like the first question. What do they
Yeah.
believe? Are they safe to
Mhm.
be around?
Yeah, or like it often, I find in particular, this is in particular when I speak to Americans, is that it comes from what church do you go to? Because
Yes.
that tells somebody where they stand in their belief system. Sometimes it tells them what family they come from, all of those sorts of things. That's not quite as um, infiltrated in Australia, but I find whenever I speak to an American, that tends to be it's the question where you get a lot of answers. Um,
Oh, absolutely. And I grew up in a a Baptist type culture.
mm,
And I was talking with somebody recently. He was interviewing me for his YouTube channel, and he called it the frozen chosen because you don't have any exuberance in your worship style. It's hymnals, you don't have anything beyond piano, you don't like it's very stoic kind of worship. And so that what you're saying is accurate because when you found out somebody went to an Assemblies of God church where they believed in speaking in tongues and they had very exuberant worship styles, we were very
mm,
skeptical of those folks. Like that they might be Christians, but we still should steer clear of them because they have got some things quite wrong.
yeah,
So
yeah.
absolutely, like finding out, oh, is this a First Baptist
Mm.
churchgoer? Or is this Assemblies of God churchgoer? And then you know how to interact with them.
Yeah. Are they a safe person? Are they not a safe person?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. What was it like for you to start integrating your life into your work?
Oh, wow. So I really began last summer.
Mm.
So June of 23. It's been almost a year now. Depending on when this podcast is released, it may have been a year by
Yeah.
then. But so I really began in June of 23 when I started posting on social media. And I had already had a private practice seeing clients, but it was around more common issues like relationship issues, codependency, all of those kinds of things, perfectionism, people pleasing, all of which are major issues for people recovering from high control religion, by the way.
Yeah.
Um, but a year before that, I had begun posting and thinking I wanted to lean into that work.
Mm.
And as I'm sure you know, the world of social media is not kind and can be quite toxic. And there can be a lot of really harsh pushback for people with a message like
Mm.
the message you and I have.
Yeah.
And when that started hitting me, then, and I didn't know how to structure it or what boundaries to set, how to handle the comments. Like I thought I needed to comment and dialogue with people. Um, it was too much. So I shut that down after probably only a month or two and just put it on the shelf. I was like, I can't do this. There were things going on in my personal life as well. For example, I had just separated from my husband not long before that. We were going through a divorce. So personally, my life was in quite a bit of upheaval. And then to have this religious trauma so activated when I didn't even really own that that's what it was or know that that's what it was, um, it was just, it was too much. So even though I had kind of deconstructed and released the beliefs, I hadn't really done enough of the healing work
Mm.
around it or knew how to protect myself from the ugliness and the vitriol that comes when you are speaking out against it
Yeah.
or against these high control groups. So I did, I was back in therapy and really confronted a lot of that and did a lot more self-education, did a lot of understanding cult mind control. That's when everything fell into place for me, when I found Stephen Hassan's work, Combating Cult Mind Control. And I realized that's why the term religious trauma didn't ever feel like it fit for me, because it was this mind control I was under, which was so damaging and so toxic. But I didn't have, the flashbacks, and I didn't have the anxiety. I didn't have any of that, but it's because I was so dissociated all the time because of the mind control. And so, and now I can own that that is religious trauma, of course, too. But so that was a game changer for me. And when I understood that evangelical Christianity, and especially the fundamentalist version of it that I grew up in, was a cult, like I came to be able to call it that because of the behavior control, thought control, motion control, information control. Those are kind of the criteria that were so front and center. I was able to begin to educate people about it in a way that felt grounded and felt there was more confidence there. And I set the boundaries early on that I am not dialoguing with people who are indoctrinated, because there's no point.
It's like I feel like it's trying to have a rational conversation with an intoxicated person.
Yes. Yes, exactly. They're not able to hear you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I know what that's like, because I went, not super, super long ago, I wasn't able to hear people either,
Yeah.
right? So I know what that's like. So why would I get lost in the weeds with that? And when it was so disruptive to my emotional well-being. So I set a rule very early on with social media that any comments like that would just get deleted right away. I wasn't even dialogue. People would get blocked, I would delete. And then I ended up building what felt like a really safe, vibrant community of people who did want to comment and did want to learn more and did want to share with each other. And so it just kind of naturally, once I set those boundaries and kept all of the ugliness out very intentionally, the community itself began to flourish, and I began to learn from people. So I have, of course, have my own lens I'm dealing all of this through, but then there's people with all kinds of other religious backgrounds that are telling me their stories, and then we see the common threads, and then I can share more based on all this other information I'm gathering, and have people connected in a private Facebook group now, which is just an incredible space for people to kind of share and get feedback from one another. And so it just evolved over time, but I made the decision this spring, so spring of 2024, to let go of my other part of my practice, where I was still seeing people. I've been seeing some people for several years. So to really let them go, to kind of get off insurances altogether and really focus just on religious harm recovery work and build that up, and focus on online education, building online community, and working one-on-one coaching. And so in less than a year, here we are. That's
Yeah.
so it's been quick, the turnaround. But
Wow. And so in this post-traumatic growth stage, what brings you joy and peace?
oh, so many things. Life feels just joyful now in
Yeah.
general when you don't have that intensity hanging over you all the time.
Yeah.
So just actually living my life brings me joy. I'm
Yeah.
not living for eternity anymore and disregarding the day to day. Um, but to answer more specifically, what brings me joy, I have my two little paw people that live with me, Fitzgerald and Zelda. They're my cats, so they show up sometimes in my social media and things like that. I'm engaged, so we're getting married in August of 2024, and he grew up non-religious, so that's been
Oh,
awesome.
gosh.
I'd say he grew up unchurched. So
Wow. He probably thinks that some of the things you're saying seem insane. That's what
I
I
will
find.
So this is how I knew pretty early on he was probably the one for me, is he did not understand my background, but I told him I was just beginning to explore the world of religious trauma recovery at that point. And we met on a dating app, and one of the questions is something like that you feel passionately about. And so I decided to vet him by essentially saying, this is what I work with, this is what
Yeah.
I care about. And so after our first date, he was actually visiting from Maui, Hawaii, and I was in Pennsylvania. So it was a whole kind of magical experience. This is where I do believe in the universe kind of bringing people together. But after he went back, he was like, I want to understand your background more. Do you have any books you could recommend that would help me understand how you were raised and what your experience was? And I had him read Unfollow by Megan Phelps Roper, who grew up in the Wells, what was it? The something, I can't think of it, but it was a very Westboro Baptist. That's what it
Yes.
was.
Yeah.
They were in the news. I mean, they're really, whew. So that and Pure by Linda K. Klein to understand purity culture. And he read both of those and we talked about them on our video call dates.
Right.
So yeah, so he didn't understand it, but he is a learner and very curious and very open. And so he, you know, wanted to understand, which was pretty amazing.
Yeah. And planning weddings are fun.
Well, we're eloping, so we're not really
Oh,
planning a wedding. We're just gonna go find a little waterfall and say our vows.
oh, lovely. I mean, planning weddings are fun, but they're also a lot. So I can get
Yeah.
behind that. That sounds like a much better option. Um,
Yeah.
oh,
So we
okay.
just
I have been finishing these episodes by asking, what would you say to somebody who is deep in their deconstruction or deep in that destabilizing phase?
oh, so many things because it looks so different for different people, right?
Mm,
Um, I think that I would encourage them to try to find at least one other person who gets it.
mm,
When I came out of that setting or that world, it was very isolating for me because I was raised in it. All of my childhood connections were part of it. My college friends were all part of it. My family was all part of it. I didn't really know how to make friends outside of that. I was going through a divorce. So once I started, I mean, even connecting with people online, which is what you and I do a lot of,
mm,
um, that can be so healing just to have validation of somebody else gets this really weird, isolating thing that we went through. So
yeah.
getting connected, I would say, is probably my biggest piece of advice.
I love that. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. This has been great.
It's been so lovely.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Beyond the Surface. I hope you found today's conversation as insightful and inspiring as I did. If you enjoyed the episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with others who might benefit from these stories. Stay connected with us on social media for updates and more content. I love connecting with all of you. Remember, no matter where you are in your journey, you're not alone. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep moving forward. Take care.